was and remains the worst act of domestic terrorism in this country. Tim McVeigh was put to death and was charged and convicted for the murder of 8 FBI agents. The civilians, the non-government employees who were killed in that blast, including Bud's daughter, Julie. The other 161 people, Terry Nichols, the co-conspirator, was charged in state court in Oklahoma for those 161 people, and he was convicted. He was convicted of killing 20 times the number of people that Tim McVeigh numerically was charged with. 161 people as opposed to 8. And Tim McVeigh was sentenced to life without parole for the same crime and 20 times the number of victims that Timothy McVeigh was put to death for. I think that it bears remembering because it was such a horrific crime. All of these crimes, of course, are awful. They're all awful. No one person's pain is greater or lesser than another person's. All of these crimes, whether they were against an individual or a group, were despicable. But if one wants a blatant example of so much inherent inequity, one need not look much further than this terrible act we called Oklahoma City bombing, where one perpetrator remains convicted of the worst mass murder in American history and will live and die, live his life in prison and die a blip in a newspaper upon his death for killing 161 innocent people. And his co-conspirator was executed for killing 8. This issue does involve human beings. That's what this is all about, from the person or persons in the original crime and everyone around them and their grief to the person put to death and their loved ones, and more grief, as you've heard, this cycle, horrible tears. And so I just mentioned this because we did have an execution tonight in this state. It was the 17th in this state this year. It was the 43rd execution already in this country this year. There's one more execution this month, next week, a tentative likely execution in Arizona. The next night this program convenes in 2 weeks on November the 4th. It will yet again mark an almost certain commemoration of an execution in Alabama. These grind on. 2 other numbers. The 17th execution in Texas tonight marked, we began executing in December of 1982, marked now the 464th execution in this state. That is 38% of all executions in this country. The execution tonight was the 1,231st since executions resumed in 77. So we're talking about 464 out of 1231. You do the math, and it's outrageous. It is outrageous. So I would ask you in a closing comment to bear in mind, you've heard me say this before in numerous forums, and I feel it bears repeating tonight as this particular program comes to an end. It is naive of anyone in this room to think that this terrible issue we call murder, violence, the death penalty, it is naive to think that it cannot happen to you. Whether you end up being put on death row for a crime you don't commit, whether you lose a child or a relative at the hands of someone way beyond who you'll ever meet. None of these people ever thought they'd end up on a panel like this talking about an incident that they had hoped would never come to their lives and their families. But it did, and they are here. We all hope and pray that no one in this country has to endure this nightmare. But you know as well as I do that an average of 30,000 people a year go through this pain. It's not hard to understand the rage in this country when 30,000 innocent people a year are murdered in senseless violence at the hands of our fellow citizens. This is a disease. It's not a problem, it's a disease. And I urge you, when you go to the polls, that you demand from your elected officials to know their position on this. We all bear responsibility for putting people in office. A person like a Bob Macy, who holds the record for the most people ever sent to death row in any jurisdiction in this country. That responsibility falls to those who vote. So this issue is your issue. If you are mercifully fortunate to not have violence visit your home in your lifetime, great. This issue is still your issue every time you get an opportunity to go into a voting booth with your conscience, your ethics, your God, your choice. This is your issue. I ask you once again to join me in a warm round of applause for all of these people.